So as we pass the first anniversary of the outbreak of COVID in Britain, we're looking at the 15 top Boris Johnson mistakes that led to one of the worst per capita COVID death rates in the world and the worst recession amongst the G7 collection of the largest economies in the world. Before we get into it, please hit the like button, subscribe and get notified of new videos. Now, I don't know about you, I'm personally fed up with hearing from people who have little interest in politics saying, "Oh, those politicians, they're all as bad as each other, aren't they?" Well, my answer is no, they're not. And this video is highlighting 15 fundamental mistakes that Boris Johnson personally made that it's hard to believe any of the opposition leaders, or even Theresa May for that matter, would have got anywhere near as badly wrong. Number 1, lack of preparation. Johnson reckons his government, we did everything we could in the fight against coronavirus. But as COVID swept through China in early 2020, Blojo was spending time relaxing at the country retreat at Chequers, celebrating Brexit and sorting out his love life, dumping his wife, who was receiving treatment for cancer at the time, what a lovely human being he is, and hooking up with Carrie Symonds, nicknamed Princess Nutnut by the other special advisors at Number 10. Number 2, ignoring COBRA meetings. These emergency COBRA meetings are held by senior cabinet ministers to plan responses to national emergencies like pandemics. Johnson didn't even bother attending the first 5 such meetings on the subject of COVID response. He was far too busy finalising his divorce, talking bollocks about Brexit unicorns crapping rainbows, and announcing his engagement to Princess Nutnut. Number 3, not taking COVID seriously at the start. On March the 3rd, 2020, the Scientific Advisory Committee, SAGE, issued advice to the public about hand hygiene, including the clear instruction not to shake hands. On that very same day, Johnson boasted how he had shaken hands with staff and COVID patients during a visit to Kettering General Hospital a couple of days earlier. Within days of that press announcement, Johnson himself had succumbed to the virus. What an absolute idiot. Number 4, not cancelling the Cheltenham Festival. Over 250,000 people were allowed to attend last year's Cheltenham horse racing festival as the COVID pandemic was gathering pace in the UK, prompting the Irish Foreign Minister to say that he would have cancelled it had it been held in Ireland. The horse racing industry as a whole has been a very kind donor, has donated tens of thousands of pounds to Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, whose decision it was to let Cheltenham go ahead. So of course he was always going to allow the event to happen. Blojo, as a leader, should have overturned that financially oriented decision. Number 5, delaying the first national lockdown. Johnson announced the national lockdown on the 16th of March 2020, but made a decision to delay the actual implementation until 23rd of March, a week later. And that 1 week contributed to an estimated 20,000 needless deaths through that delay. And that's according to Neil Ferguson, who was the government's chief epidemiologist at the time until he later resigned. Number 6, failing to protect the elderly and vulnerable in care homes. At least another 20,000 of Britain's oldest and most vulnerable citizens died as a consequence of Johnson's policy allowing elderly patients being discharged from hospital into the care home system without being even tested for COVID. Number 7, Johnson shut down Britain's fledgling test and trace system in March, only to reinstate it in April 2020. 1 year and £37 billion later, it is still not fit for purpose. Headed up by the illegally appointed and unqualified Dido Harding, ex of the Jockey Club, one of Matt Hancock's cronies from the racing industry, who was at one time the disastrous CEO at TalkTalk before her lapses in cybersecurity saw the company lose £60 million in revenues. Dido Harding's whole £37 billion test, track and trace system has made no material difference whatsoever to the number of cases of COVID-19 in the UK. What that basically means is that we have spaffed £540 per head. That's for every man, woman and child in the UK. £540 a head for an app that doesn't work. And they say we can't afford to give our nurses more than a 1% pay rise. Number 8. Keeping the borders open for months. One of the things that we had going for us as a country in terms of combating COVID is our island status. But restrictions on travel into the country were delayed for 3 months, and borders have never been properly closed to the extent that other countries have closed them, such as Japan, New Zealand, Australia. Even now, the quarantine system for arrivals from overseas is clunky, with people failing to quarantine and being missed by that failed track and trace system. Number 9. The Cummings effect. Johnson gravely undermined the public's trust in government advice in May 2020 by refusing to dismiss or take any sanctions at all towards Dominic Cummings, at the time his chief advisor, who broke lockdown rules by driving almost the entire length of England during lockdown with his family to travel to his parents' home in the northeast from London. While staying in the northeast, he took a day trip to the now infamous scenic town of Barnard Castle. And that day out happened to coincide with his wife's birthday. But according to Cummings, it wasn't just a birthday outing. Oh no. What it was, he was trying to test his eyesight to make sure he was fit to drive on the short journey to Barnard Castle before he undertook the longer journey of returning to London the following day. That was the excuse. I know, it's absolutely pathetic, isn't it? But despite that, Johnson protected Cummings, who'd, by the way, just been given a 40% pay rise on his massive salary. And there were calls for him to be sacked across the media, but Johnson ignored them and stood by his man. Analysis by University College London found the actions of Cummings reduced people's willingness to follow social distancing rules from that point forward, probably causing many more excess deaths that could have been avoided. Number 10. Confused messaging. Johnson began relaxing the initial lockdown in June 2020, while the infection rate was still high and against the advice of his senior scientists. The restrictions that remained were so complex and illogical that most people, including me, gave up trying to comply to the letter with the law because we didn't understand what the restrictions actually were at that point. Johnson also undermined public confidence in himself as a leader by constantly over-promising, notably on the delivery of a world-beating test and trace system. That's always one of his phrases, and the government's ability to defeat the virus by Easter 2020, then by the summer of 2020, then by Christmas 2020, then by the summer of 2021, and so it goes on. Number 11. Johnson and his government have awarded more than £10 billion of COVID-related contracts to private companies, and a recent New York Times investigation found that of those contracts, more than 50% of them were awarded to either newly formed companies with no previous experience of delivering these products and services they were being contracted to deliver, or were previous donors to the Tory party. This is corruption, pure and simple. Many of those contracts have led to substandard or non-existent products and appear to be well overpriced as well. Many of the private consultants contracted are currently being paid £7,000 a day. And it's been estimated that for every pound donated to the Tory party, those donors involved in this racket, because that's what it is, it's a racket, they've received around £11 worth of PPE and COVID-related business contracts. A pretty damn fine return on their investment. Number 12. Eat out to help out. Rishi Sunak, of course, took the credit for prioritising the economy over public health with his multi-million-pound bribes to get people eating out at a discount last August. But as Prime Minister, Johnson should have had the foresight and intelligence to realise that the scheme would come to be known as the Eat Out to Die Out scheme. And sure enough, this completely dumb Tory plan drove up new infections by an estimated 17%, again causing needless excess deaths and ironically net damage to the economy. Number 13. Relaxing the rules at Christmas. Johnson claimed it would be inhumane to keep lockdown rules in place for the Christmas break. But what was really inhumane was that positive confirmed cases in the UK hit an all-time high of 81,523 cases in a single day on December 29th after that lockdown pause. Number 14. Johnson refused to accept the EU's offer to extend the Brexit transition period beyond the 31st of December 2020, which ensured that all the turmoil of leaving the EU happened at exactly the same time that the UK was reeling from high death and infection rates from COVID, but also a 41% drop in trade with the EU during the month of January 2021. Clearly, this was a dogmatic Brexity decision, not based on any type of economic or public health sense. Number 15. Blojo rejected calls from his scientific advisors in September and from Keir Starmer, leader of the official opposition, in October 2020 for a national 2-week circuit breaker lockdown. He preferred instead to rely on a system of tiered regional lockdowns that failed to prevent the infection rate from surging and which eventually led us into another much longer term lockdown, with a resultant impact on the economy and the mental health of the population. The Tories love to give Keir Starmer the nickname Captain Hindsight, saying he predicted these things after they happened, but it's not true. I'm not the biggest Keir Starmer fan on the planet, but his nickname maybe should have been Captain Foresight, because he did exactly see how that particular aspect of the pandemic was playing out, and Boris Johnson would have done well to have taken his advice.